It started like every other raid, cold, efficient, and brutal. The Lorak had done this to thousands of species before. They didn't see it as conquest. They called it preservation of the hunt. Their way of life depended on it, gathering the galaxy's most agile prey, releasing them into controlled wilderness zones, and hunting them for sport. Not for food, not for science, just for the thrill of killing something that screamed. Humans were just the next species on their list. The collectors hit Earth in coordinated strikes across 5 continents. Cities collapsed within hours. Governments shattered. Soldiers were incinerated before their fingers could brush their triggers. The Lorak didn't need full-scale war. They simply tore open portals, snatched up thousands of humans, and disappeared back through the void. Just like that. One of them was Mason Keller. He was nobody. 34 years old, ex-military, dishonorably discharged for disobedience during a humanitarian mission gone sideways. He'd seen war, watched friends burn, and knew exactly how little his life mattered to the people above him. Mason was sitting in a crumbling bar in Arizona when the sky ripped open and the air smelled like copper and ozone. He remembered the light, the force pulling at his body. Then nothing. When he woke up, it wasn't Earth anymore. He was naked, bruised, dumped into a jungle dripping with blue sap and unfamiliar insects. All around him, other humans stirred, frightened, bloodied. Some screamed, some cried, some prayed. Mason just clenched his jaw. The first day they figured out the truth. The skies cracked open, and a massive Lorak cruiser appeared above them. A booming voice, translated by something implanted in their skulls, told them the rules. "This is a game zone," the voice said. "Run, survive, provide sport for your superiors, glory to the hunt." Then came the countdown. 10 days. They had 10 days to survive. Mason didn't wait. While others panicked or debated, he moved. He found sharp rocks, made a crude blade, and studied the terrain. It was all instinct. His training kicked in. He didn't talk to people unless he had to, didn't try to lead. He just watched, waited. The Lorak arrived on the 3rd day. They came cloaked, invisible to the eye, until they wanted to be seen. 12 feet tall, reptilian skin, multi-eyed helms, long limbs ending in razor-tipped digits. They had guns, but they rarely used them. That wasn't the fun part. They liked the chase. They liked screams. And they got them. Mason saw 3 people die the first night. One woman tried to fight back with a branch. They laughed while she bled. Another man was impaled and hung from a tree as a warning. A third simply vanished, only his blood left behind. But Mason wasn't prey. Not really. He started studying the hunters, their patterns, their timing, the way their technology gave off a faint hum just before they struck. He gathered survivors, the ones who listened, the ones who were angry, not afraid. By the 6th day, he had a crew of 6. They had spears now, traps. They never moved in the open. They built signals and learned the terrain better than the bastards who designed it. Mason didn't care about escape. Not anymore. He wanted to make them bleed. By the 7th day, Mason didn't just want to survive. He wanted to humiliate them. It was never about survival after that. Not really. Not for him. They'd taken him from a life already crumbling. No family, no home, no medals, no honor. They thought they were hunting weak prey. They didn't understand they'd snatched someone with nothing left to lose. Someone who knew how to turn trauma into focus. Pain into strategy. Rage into fuel. The first trap worked better than expected. They used one of the dead bodies, what was left of it, as bait. A rotting pile of meat barely recognizable as human. Mason had forced himself to drag it out, not because he wanted to, but because he knew what it would do to the Lorak's pride. These creatures, so used to being on top, didn't think like soldiers. They thought like spoiled predators, arrogant, lazy, predictable. He set the tripwire low, just beneath a pool of mossy roots. The spike trap was built from sharpened bone, stripped from a dead Lorak they'd taken down 2 nights before. A rare, bloody victory. When the Lorak came to collect the body, expecting another easy kill, it stepped right into the trap. There was no scream, no high-tech alarm, just a gurgle as its leg was torn open, the spikes puncturing straight through muscle and scale. Then came the fire. They had stolen a few of the Lorak's own incendiary gel packs, biochemical tools designed to clean up after the hunt. Mason had repurposed them. When the trap triggered, it released a small spray of the gel, set alight by a makeshift flint spark. The Lorak went up in a rush of purple flames and thrashing limbs. The jungle echoed with its death. Mason didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at the others and said, "That's one." After that, something changed. The hunters, once casual and cocky, became restless. They came in pairs now. They fired first and searched later. But more importantly, they were angry, unfocused. They stopped treating it like a sport and started treating it like a problem. And that made them sloppy. Mason's group had grown to 10 now. Survivors who had either seen what he did or simply clung to his presence like it was a shield. He didn't try to lead them with words. He just moved, and they followed. There was Lucas, the engineer from Chicago who never stopped mumbling equations under his breath but could rig an explosive from scrap and spit. There was Dom, a quiet teenager who hadn't said a word since day one, but had a sniper's eye with a slingshot. Then there was Reuben, older than most, missing 2 fingers, but a mechanic and survivalist who knew how to gut anything with a blade, alien or not. They weren't soldiers, but they didn't need to be. On day 8, they flipped the rules. Instead of hiding, they stalked. Instead of running, they laid ambushes. Instead of surviving, they hunted back. Each Lorak death brought consequences. Drones began to sweep the skies more frequently. Sonic bombs cratered parts of the jungle where resistance had been reported. But Mason never stayed in one place long. He kept them moving like ghosts, never sleeping in the same camp twice, always traveling through terrain the Lorak's scanners struggled to penetrate. It wasn't enough to kill them. He needed them scared. He wanted them to feel what humans felt when they first arrived here, cornered, helpless, broken. He wanted that moment of doubt in their eyes before the blade struck. That twitch of fear when they realized humans weren't the cattle they thought they'd tagged. The turning point came on the 9th night. One of the Lorak leaders came down. This one was different, not a foot soldier. He wore darker armor, carried a spear-like weapon that pulsed with plasma energy. His face was half covered in ceremonial bone plating, trophies of past kills. He didn't speak when he arrived, didn't bark orders. He just stood there on a ridge overlooking the jungle, eyes scanning, waiting. Mason saw him from a distance, through the thick trees and shadows. He knew immediately this one wasn't like the others. This one had seen war, real war. It meant the Lorak were taking them seriously. Good. They made their move under the cover of a storm. The rain came down like needles, thick and warm, drenching everything. It muffled sound, masked heat, made tech unreliable. Perfect. Lucas set the trap, a series of baited tripwires connected to a voltage spike from a salvaged alien cell. Dom had scouted the path earlier, noting where the Lorak leader would likely patrol. Reuben waited in the trees, blade drawn, soaked but steady. Mason moved like a shadow. When the Lorak passed the trigger point, everything exploded into motion. The voltage spike didn't kill, it stunned, but just enough. The leader faltered, the plasma spear skittering from his hands. Dom's rock hit next, slamming into one of the creature's eye clusters. A perfect shot. Mason didn't wait. He lunged from the undergrowth, grabbed the fallen spear, and drove it clean through the Lorak's midsection. There was no victory cry, no roar, just a wet, sputtering gasp. The body twitched, then went still. Mason stood over it, breathing hard. The others gathered slowly, unsure if it was over. Lucas was grinning for the first time. Reuben wiped his knife on a leaf. Then Mason did something none of them expected. He didn't walk away. He knelt, dug into the dead Lorak's armor, and pulled free the comm unit embedded in its shoulder. It was still active, still glowing. He looked at the blinking alien symbols, then held it up and said in a low, steady voice, "You hear me, you lizard fucks? This isn't your jungle anymore. You're not the hunters. We are." There was no reply, but they knew. The next morning, the skies changed. No more broadcasts, no more mocking rules, no more countdown. The Lorak had gone silent. Lucas thought they'd triggered an evacuation. Reuben said they were regrouping. Dom just pointed to the treetops where drones hovered like vultures, scanning, searching. Mason didn't speak. He just kept moving. But he knew. He hadn't just killed a commander. He'd declared war, and now they were coming for him. All of them. Good. He wasn't done yet. Mason knew they would come in force now. The moment he hijacked their comms and spat defiance into their ears, he flipped the last switch. It was no longer sport. It was war. And predators hate war when the prey fights back. The jungle felt different after that. The air turned heavy. The ambient sounds of alien wildlife, the clicks, the howls, the chittering things in the trees, grew quieter, more distant. Even nature could sense something bigger was coming. By mid-morning, they spotted the first wave. Not hunters, enforcers. Heavily armored Lorak with no interest in games. They marched through the forest with drone cover overhead, moving in tactical formations unlike the lazy patterns of the earlier squads. They weren't here to chase or toy. They were here to exterminate. Mason gritted his teeth and called it, "Split into pairs. Scatter. Regroup at the river bend by nightfall. Don't stop moving." Lucas hesitated. "You think they'll follow?" "They won't need to. They've got scanners and bloodhounds. So make them follow something else." Dom, silent as ever, handed Mason a small pouch, blended Lorak entrails and mud. It stank like rot and acid. Mason nodded. "Good thinking." They smeared themselves with it, disgusting, sticky, and effective. The Lorak used scent-based tracking, and now they'd think they were following their own. Mason ducked into the trees with Dom. The others scattered in separate directions. They didn't run, they maneuvered. 2 hours later, Mason and Dom climbed high into a cluster of bulbous tree pods that hung like giant green tumors. From that vantage point, they could see them. A full Lorak unit, 6 soldiers, plasma rifles, miniature recon drones humming around them in tight orbits. Dom pointed to their flanks, weak spots, exposed tech. Mason nodded but held up a hand. Not yet. He wasn't here to pick off scouts anymore. He was after the core. They needed to know how the game zone was managed. There had to be a central system, something that monitored the humans, deployed the hunters, and controlled the extraction protocols. If Mason could find that, he could shut this hellhole down from the inside, or burn it to the ground. The plan took form that night after regrouping. Mason, Lucas, Reuben, Dom, and the last few stragglers who'd survived this long 12 humans now, hardened, dirty, hollow-eyed but angry. "We don't win by surviving," Mason said. "We win by making them choke on their own tech." Lucas sat up straighter. "You want the command post?" "Exactly. You're out of your goddamn mind." "Probably," Mason said. "But we've killed their leader, hijacked their comms. We're ghosts to their scanners. This is the last shot before they decide to wipe this entire zone with orbital strikes." Reuben, carving meat from a skinned lizard thing, muttered, "Then we better move before they figure out the blast radius." The plan was simple, brutal, high risk. Lucas had tracked the drone patterns and narrowed down the control hub to a ridge 3 clicks west. The ridge had a jutting formation that didn't match the natural terrain, likely artificial, built to blend in. That was their target. To reach it, they had to pass through a kill zone. Fields of open marsh, no trees, no cover. Mason didn't flinch. "We move at dawn, 1 shot, 1 chance." By dawn, they were crawling through sludge, covered in camo paint made from Lorak blood and sap. The marsh sucked at their legs like quicksand. Every step was slow, deliberate. They stayed low, silent. Drones passed overhead but didn't stop. The scent masking held. When they reached the ridge, Mason gave the signal. 2 teams, 1 for distraction, 1 for infiltration. He led the infiltration team, Lucas and Dom with him. The others would circle around and trigger a false attack 200 yards east. The ridge looked like a giant tumor from below, moss-covered, cracked, ancient. But the cracks were too clean, too straight. Lucas found the access panel buried beneath a mound of roots. "EMP locked," he muttered. "No way to hack this quietly." Mason handed him a repurposed Lorak charge. "Then let's be loud." The blast cracked the silence like thunder. Immediately, alarms flared. Not just the high-pitched alien buzz, but a pulsing hum deep in the stone, like a heartbeat. Lights inside flickered. The outer shell cracked open, revealing metal corridors glowing with blue veins. Mason didn't wait. He charged. Inside, the walls were sleek, sterile, cold. The air smelled of machine oil and something sickly sweet. Preservation fluid, maybe. Lucas planted a signal jammer to block outgoing transmissions. Dom hung back, covering the rear. They moved fast, down one corridor, then another. Signs written in alien glyphs meant nothing to them, but Mason didn't need to read them. He followed the power cables, the thickest ones, the ones that pulsed with life. They found it at the heart of the complex, a control room. Massive screens showed various sectors of the jungle, infrared maps, heat signatures, drone feeds. Monitors tracked human vitals, location tags, threat levels. In the center stood a towering console pulsing with input lights and command gestures. It was a god's eye view of the hunt. And now it was Mason's. Lucas rushed to the mainframe, pulling tools from his bag. "I can fry it. Trigger a cascade loop. It'll overload and torch the zone." "Do it," Mason said. "Make it scream when it dies." As Lucas worked, Dom shouted, "Incoming!" Back the way they came, heavy footsteps. No subtlety, no hesitation. Mason turned and fired a stolen plasma pistol. One of the enforcers dropped, chest caved in. Another barreled through, swinging a kinetic blade. Dom dodged, rolled, and stabbed it under the jaw with a sharpened pipe. But more were coming. Lucas shouted, "I need 30 seconds!" "You've got 10! The room shook as a grenade exploded nearby. Mason ducked, grabbed a piece of metal panel and used it as a shield. Plasma bolts sparked off it like fireworks. He pushed forward, smashing the edge into the throat of another attacker. Blood, thick and black, splashed the walls. Done! Lucas roared. The control panel lit up red. Warnings blared. Power surged through the cables. Screens distorted. The entire complex shuddered. Mason looked around. We need to go, now! But Dom didn't move. He was shot, chest wound deep and smoking. He coughed, trying to breathe. Mason grabbed him. Come on, kid. Dom shook his head once, then smiled. Mason didn't hesitate. He pulled the detonator from Dom's belt, pressed it into his hand, and whispered, Wait 10 seconds. Make it count. Dom nodded. Mason and Lucas ran. Behind them, the jungle control complex erupted in fire. The blast shook the ridge. Lorak Command went dark. Every camera, every scanner, every drone, gone. The entire jungle lit up with confusion. Orders stopped flowing. Coordination collapsed, and humans across the zone felt it. Something had changed. Something big. Mason didn't stop running. He collapsed by the riverbank 2 miles out, lungs burning, ribs bruised, blood caked on his face. Lucas landed beside him, wheezing, then laughing. They're blind, he said. We cut their goddamn eyes out. Mason didn't laugh. He looked up at the sky, at the dark shapes of Lorak ships circling like vultures, and whispered, Now we show them what real predators look like. The sky hadn't looked right in days. The clouds hung low and electric, swirling in slow-motion spirals above the jungle. Mason sat beneath a twisted tree, its roots tangled like broken ribs, and watched the alien carriers drift in circles high above them. They hadn't moved since the blast. Not forward, not backward, just hovered. Paralyzed. The entire game zone had gone quiet after the explosion. No drones, no broadcasts, no patrols. For the first time since he'd arrived, Mason heard nothing but wind, birds, and human breath. They'd broken something vital. Lucas was still nursing a shattered arm, held together with makeshift braces and stolen med gel. His face was pale, slick with fever sweat, but he kept muttering the same thing over and over. We fried their backbone, fried their damn spine. Reuben returned at noon with news. His beard was stained with blood, none of it his. We found another camp. 17 survivors, scattered, hungry, but ready to kill. Mason didn't smile. He just said, Bring them in. Within hours, the human numbers had doubled. They didn't look like an army. They looked like what they were. Torn clothes, skin burnt, eyes sunken, half mad with fear and rage. But they had something now they hadn't had before. Direction. That night, they lit a fire. For the first time since the abduction, they didn't hide it. They let it blaze high, let the smoke rise into the sky like a signal flare, a warning, or a dare. Mason stood before them, arms crossed, eyes cold. You've all been hunted, tortured, watched, and you've survived. That alone makes you better than anything walking around in that sky. But now it's our turn. We're done playing mouse. Someone in the back asked, What do we do? We hit them, Mason said. Everywhere at once. He laid out the map, sketched into dirt with a burnt stick. Their system is decentralized. We shut down the core, but they've still got outposts, barracks, fuel lines, storage bunkers, and the transports that brought us here. Lucas chimed in. We hit them hard enough, they'll either run or call reinforcements. And if reinforcements come, we hijack their signal. Reuben grinned. Lure in the bastards and crash their fleet from the inside. A heavy silence followed. Then someone, an older woman with burns across her arms, stood up and said, Then let's burn it all. They split into 3 strike teams. Team 1, led by Reuben, would hit the barracks deep in Sector 4, where Lorak foot soldiers rested between hunts. He'd found it by tracking their garbage piles and blood runoffs. Team 2, led by a wiry ex-cop named Harris, would raid a drone storage facility. If they could steal or even redirect the automated death machines, the balance would shift overnight. Team 3, Mason's team, himself, Lucas, and 5 others, would assault the skyport. It was suicide on paper. The Lorak skyport was built atop a mountain ridge, heavily guarded, shielded, reinforced with static field towers that disrupted long-range attacks. But Mason wasn't coming with bombs. He was coming with fury. They moved at night. No one spoke. At the summit, they found the port. It wasn't a structure. It was a nest. Dozens of ships docked across skeletal spires of metal and bone. Alien lights flickered in rhythmic pulses. Lorak soldiers paced the platforms, their weapons crackling with charged energy. Lucas whispered, "It's bigger than we thought." "Doesn't matter," Mason replied. "Bigger they are." He didn't finish the sentence, because suddenly the alarms returned. But they weren't Lorak signals. They were human. From Reuben's direction, a wall of flame lit up the sky. Explosions rocked the trees. Barracks were burning. Screams echoed, both human and alien. Seconds later, the east side erupted in static bursts. Team 2's raid had started. Lorak guards around the port panicked, dispersed, shouted into their comms. Orders fractured, coordination collapsed, and that's when Mason attacked. They surged from the cliffside like shadows, silent, ruthless. One by one they took down the perimeter guards, cut throats, broke spines, used their weapons against them. Plasma blades hissed as they sliced through armor. Blood sprayed across the steel platforms. Mason pushed forward, heading straight for the command tower. Lucas hacked a console along the way, rerouting fuel from docked ships into exposed lines. The air smelled like burning oil and ozone. Halfway to the tower, they were spotted. 3 Lorak enforcers blocked the path, massive, armored plasma cannons primed. Mason didn't stop. He picked up a fallen alien rifle and charged. The first blast missed him by inches. He ducked, rolled, came up behind the first enforcer and jammed the muzzle into its throat, pulled the trigger. Bone and gore erupted. The second tackled him, sent him flying. Lucas screamed, lunged, and stabbed the beast in the side with a power coupler. It convulsed, twitched, then collapsed. Mason stood, bleeding from his shoulder, and put 2 shots into the last one's skull. "Keep moving," he grunted. At the command tower, they found it unguarded. The chaos below had drained their resources. Lucas accessed the uplink terminal. "This thing can patch into the fleet," he said. "I can broadcast a system-wide override." "Do it!" Mason stood at the window and watched the jungle burn. Humans had taken down outposts. Drones were falling from the sky. Lorak corpses hung from trees like trophies. The tide had turned. Lucas handed him a small device. "Press this and every ship docked here will reboot under our code. We can fly them, Mason. We can get off this rock." Mason didn't move. He looked down at the battlefield, at the dead, at the survivors still fighting. "No," he said. "We can leave." "We're not done." He walked back to the console, reprogrammed the override. "Instead of flying away, we fly them into the sky. Full auto, no shields, straight into the heart of their fleet." Lucas stared. "You want to suicide bomb their motherships?" "No," Mason said. "I want to send a message." He pressed the button. All across the ridge, Lorak ships roared to life. But instead of rising gracefully, they screamed into the heavens, engines overheating, trajectories locked. One by one, they vanished into the clouds. Then exploded. Flashes of light painted the sky like fireworks. Each blast echoed like a thunderclap. Mason watched it all, unblinking. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just whispered, "Now they know." The humans behind him, bloodied, broken but alive, stood in silence, staring at the flames. And for the first time since the Lorak came, the sky was quiet. The air was thick with the smell of melted metal and alien blood. Smoke drifted over the jungle like a black curtain. The sky above the ridge had turned a deep crimson, where chunks of Lorak carriers burned like falling stars. What hadn't exploded was in freefall, wounded ships limping across the stratosphere, systems fried, hulls breached. And for the first time since Mason had been dragged into this nightmare, the predators were retreating. But he wasn't finished. He stood at the edge of the smoldering platform, watching debris fall from the heavens. Beside him, Lucas leaned against a busted antenna, his wounded arm now completely numb. "You know," Lucas muttered, "we could have flown out of here. We had a shot." Mason didn't look at him. "They still have colonies, still have breeding stations. This place is just one of many." "You planning to wipe out their entire species?" Mason's jaw tightened. "I'm planning to make them remember what fear tastes like." Reuben arrived before dawn, covered in soot and limping from a gash across his thigh. "We took Sector 4, lost 7, blew their meat storage to hell. Bastards were keeping trophies, skulls, spines, labeled like museum pieces." Mason nodded. He'd expected as much. The Lorak didn't just hunt, they cataloged. They'd treated humanity like animals. Now they would understand what it meant to be prey. Over the next 24 hours, chaos became strategy. Survivors trickled in from all directions. Word of the rebellion had spread like wildfire. Dozens of captives who had survived in isolation now emerged, ragged, wounded, but ready to join the war. They gathered at the ridge, a growing army of the broken. Mason stood before them and spoke simply. "We killed the engine." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Lucas stepped forward. "He means the seed core, the Genesis spire." That got their attention. Everyone had heard rumors. A place in the jungle no one had seen, only whispered about. Said to be the place the Lorak bred new hunters, refined their tech, and sent genetic commands to every game zone across the quadrant. It was the brain. The rest was just muscle. Lucas confirmed it. "I cracked their mainframe before we left the tower, tracked the core's energy trail. It runs deep, underground, northeast, hidden in the roots of the jungle, camouflaged, probably guarded by whatever they've got left." Mason added, "That's where it ends. Not just this hunt, all of it." There were no cheers, no roars, just nods. Men and women picking up weapons, wiping blood from their faces, and preparing to finish what they started. The march took 3 days. They moved in staggered groups through dense jungle, clearing traps, killing patrols, dodging drones still on auto mode. The deeper they went, the more unnatural it became. Trees twisted into spirals, the ground pulsing underfoot, glowing fungus lighting the path. On the second night, they found the field. Dozens of human corpses displayed in perfect formation, skinned, gutted, frozen in artificial stasis. Some had names carved into their chests, others bore numbers. Mason forced them to bury the bodies, one by one. They said no words. Let the silence speak for the rage. By dawn on the 4th day, they reached the outer perimeter. The Genesis spire loomed ahead. It wasn't a tower, it was a living thing. Flesh fused with metal, pulsing with energy, embedded into the jungle like a tumor. Its base was surrounded by thick walls of bone and chitin, guarded by Lorak elite bred for one purpose: defense. They were massive, stronger than any Mason had seen, but they were outnumbered. And Mason had something they didn't: hate. The assault began at noon. Lucas and a crew of scavengers triggered power disruptions by overloading the spire's conduits. Sparks flew, the ground cracked, bursts of raw energy ripped through the air. Mason led the charge through the breach, wielding a plasma spear taken from the enforcer he'd killed weeks ago. Behind him, a wave of survivors screamed into battle: axes, blades, stolen alien guns, bare fists. The Lorak fought hard. They had nothing to lose. But humans had already lost everything. They swarmed the defenders, tearing through armor, crushing bone, burning flesh. Reuben used a modified drone as an explosive, sending it straight into a guard tower. The blast collapsed half the wall. Mason pushed forward, deeper into the spire. The inside was worse. Rows of tanks held human clones, blank-eyed, twitching, incomplete. Machines pumped chemicals into their veins, programmed for future hunts, for decades more of slaughter. Mason didn't hesitate. He shattered the tanks one by one. Lucas reached the core room and began his work. This thing's wired into subspace relays. If I trigger the overload here, every connected zone will go dark. Not just this one. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Mason nodded. Do it. But it'll kill everything in here. You know that, right? I said do it! Lucas hesitated, then triggered the overload. The core screamed. The spire shook, pipes burst, alarms shrieked, walls cracked, flames erupted from the floors. Mason grabbed Lucas and pulled him back. Run! They sprinted through collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris, jumping over burning wreckage. Behind them, the spire began to implode, swallowed by its own collapsing energy field. At the edge of the jungle, they turned and watched it collapse. A tower that had haunted countless species, now a pile of molten ruin. Cheers broke out behind them. People hugged, screamed, fell to their knees, not because they were safe, but because it was over. For now. That night around the fire, Lucas looked at Mason and asked, "What now?" Mason didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "We build. We prepare. Because they'll come back. Different name. Different ship. Same hunger." Lucas nodded. "And if they do?" Mason stared into the flames. "Then we won't be prey. Not anymore." He stood, walked into the jungle, and disappeared into the shadows. The man they dragged into a hunt had become the one thing the Lorak feared most. A hunter with nothing left to lose. The galaxy didn't notice when Earth fell. When humans were abducted from their homes, torn from families, homes erased from maps, it barely registered. No war declarations, no interstellar tribunals, no righteous alien coalitions speaking up in their defense. The Lorak called it culling, a necessary balance. The galaxy called it tradition. But now? Now they noticed. News of the Genesis Spire's destruction spread through subspace, like a sickness. Over 130 game zones linked to the Spire went dark in seconds. Dozens of other species, previously enslaved, hunted, experimented on, rose up in confusion, fear, and hope. The shock was immediate, but the fear that followed, that ran deeper. It wasn't just that a game zone had fallen, it was who had done it. Humans, a species considered barely worthy of cataloging. Primitive, undisciplined, short-lived. Yet somehow they hadn't just survived. They had struck back. They had burned the hunter's temple to the ground and lived to walk out of the ashes. Mason didn't care what they were saying out there. Not yet. He was building something bigger than fear. He was building vengeance. It began in the ruins of the Genesis Spire. The jungle, once roamed by Lorac elites, now belonged to them. The survivors, once scattered and afraid, had begun to rebuild. They called it Camp Ironjaw, a name stolen from the Lorac's own ranks. Every metal plate they used for roofs, every beam for walls, was ripped from crashed ships and dead predators. But Mason wasn't interested in walls. He was building an army. Every day more survivors arrived, escaped captives, rogue Lorac experiments, even a few non-human ex-prisoners who'd found their way through the chaos. The camp became a forge, and Mason became the fire. He trained them himself. Not like soldiers, like wolves. Ambush tactics, blade work, trapping, silent movement, kill zones, sabotage. He didn't care about ranks or rules. He cared about one thing, making sure no human was ever hunted again. Ever. Lucas took over tech operations. His arms still shook from the Spire blast, but he never complained. He built relays, patched into orbital debris, and intercepted Lorac comms. What he found made Mason's blood run cold. "They're regrouping," Lucas told him one night. "The ones who didn't die in the blasts are recalling war fleets, not hunters, not sportsmen, soldiers, real ones. They're calling us a rogue infestation." Mason stared at the screen. "They coming back?" "Not yet. They're waiting, watching. We embarrassed them. They won't risk another blow to their pride." "So we hit them first." Lucas blinked. "You're serious?" "We send a message. Find one of their nearby colonies. Burn it down. Leave the bodies hanging. Let them know we're not just fighting for survival now. We're fighting to make sure they regret ever laying a claw on Earth." The first strike was surgical. A Lorac outpost on a moon called Bailey Prime, once used to store cryopods for captured prey. A silent facility orbiting a gas giant, barely guarded. The perfect test run. Mason took a team of 12. They slipped in through a broken exhaust port, gutted the security staff with brutal precision, freed the captives, and then blew the entire platform into the planet's storms. The explosion left a black scar across the moon's orbit, visible from light years away. He left a message in the debris. "We remember, we learn. We hunt." The Lorac tried to deny it at first, blamed rogue mercenaries, pirates, renegades. But the galaxy wasn't buying it. A second attack followed days later, this time on a hunting launch site where new batches of game were sorted for transport. Mason and his team infiltrated it wearing stolen Lorac armor. When the alarm sounded, it was already too late. The humans had poisoned the entire atmosphere inside. Not gas, truth. A transmission. A looping video showing what the Lorac did to humans. The cages, the sport, the screaming children, and how humans fought back, tooth and nail, fire and blood. The galaxy watched. And this time, they couldn't look away. Soon, it wasn't just humans fighting. Other species began to rise, quietly, slowly. The Varnak broke their chains in the Shotheran mines. The Brek, a species once used in gladiator arenas, started targeting Lorac transport ships. And everywhere they struck, they left the same symbol, a jagged H carved into steel. H for humanity. It wasn't just Mason's name they feared anymore. It was his kind. The hunted had become the hunters. And the Lorac Empire began to fracture. They held meetings behind locked stargates, desperate to regain control. Some argued for extermination, others warned of galactic war. Still others whispered in fear. If this is how humans fight when they have nothing, what happens if they start to build something greater? Mason already had. He stood before the first formal battalion of what he called the Broken Suns. 53 humans, armed with salvaged gear and modified alien weapons. No uniforms, no colors, just scars, purpose, and hate. He paced before them, jaw clenched. They tried to erase us, he said. Made our pain a sport, our screams a game. They thought we were nothing. He raised his blade, etched with the names of the fallen. Now we make them feel everything. The Broken Suns roared in reply. No one had to tell them what to do. They were already ready. Later that night, Mason sat at the edge of the camp, sharpening his blade with a stone. Lucas joined him quietly, holding a small hollow pad with intercepted chatter. They're watching Earth now, he said. Closer than ever, waiting to see if we go back. Mason didn't stop sharpening. I'm not going back, he said. Not yet. Lucas hesitated. Why? Mason looked up at the sky, voice low. Because Earth's still innocent, still blind. If we bring this war back there, we ruin everything that makes it worth saving. Lucas sighed. So what do? We stay out here, in the dark, and we break their bones one system at a time. Lucas nodded. Until they beg for mercy? Mason's eyes were cold. No. Until they forget they ever had the right to hunt us. They started whispering about him across the stars. Not just Mason Keller, they called him the Burned Man. The Lorac gave him the name first, born from sensor footage recovered after each attack, his face always bloodied, cloaked in firelight, silent. His armor wasn't uniform, just strips of old scavenged plating tied together with bone and leather. His blade, still half melted from the Genesis Spire's blast, was etched with the marks of every Lorac commander he had killed. He became myth. He became warning. And the humans who followed him? They became a symbol of unkillable rage. The campaign hit full throttle after the Baylori massacre. Within weeks, 3 more Lorac colonies fell. Not to invasion, to humiliation. Mason's Broken Suns didn't just destroy supply chains. They hacked broadcasts, beamed unfiltered feeds of Lorac atrocities into their own capital cities, footage of children butchered for entertainment, pregnant women hunted for points, whole families auctioned like cattle. The Lorac had filmed their dominance for centuries. Mason simply returned the favor. Except now the footage ended with Lorac heads on spikes and ships crashing in flames. At first, the Empire tried to spin it. Propaganda. False flag operations. But too many planets saw too much. Too many former allies pulled away. And in backroom chambers of galactic commerce and council, quiet voices began to say what none dared say aloud. We may have poked the wrong species. Mason didn't care about their regret. He only cared about momentum. Lucas, ever the tactician, returned from a scouting mission with urgent news. We found something, he said. Coordinates to a black site. Lorac owned, no records, no public identification. Mason didn't blink. What is it? A lab, Lucas said. Buried inside an asteroid belt in the Ricari span, off-grid, built to re-engineer prey. They've been making hybrids. Reuben joined them at the map table. You mean crossbreeds? Lucas nodded. Part Lorac, part human, part whatever else they could throw in a tank. Fast, strong, built for one thing, better sport. Mason's jaw tightened. And they're alive? For now. He didn't hesitate. We go now. The lab was hidden in the ruins of a shattered moon. Thick asteroid fields surrounded it, guarded by automated turrets and cloaked mines. The Broken Suns came in hard and fast, 5 salvaged ships, stripped of ID tags, flying low and dirty. They hit the outpost like lightning. Explosions cracked the silence of deep space. Mason led the breach into the lab's core. What they found inside turned even hardened warriors pale. Tanks filled with twitching bodies, some human-shaped, others malformed, muscles too thick for bone, eyes that glowed unnaturally, claws where fingers should be, some still alive, still aware, their faces pressed against the glass. One tank held a boy. Couldn't have been older than 12 when they took him. Now he looked 20, modified. Rage trapped behind his eyes. His mouth opened as Mason passed. No words, just a silent scream. Lucas scanned the mainframe. They built these things from live captures, spliced DNA, trauma conditioning, neural programming to fear Lorak less and hate humans more. Reuben stepped forward, revolted. They wanted to pit us against ourselves. Mason didn't speak. He just raised his weapon and started shattering tanks, one by one. No mercy, no hesitation. By the time they reached the final chamber, Mason was soaked in chemical fluid and blood. His blade was nearly blunt from the sheer volume of deaths. Lucas handed him a detonator. We overload the core here. It'll collapse the entire lab. But the energy signature will alert the Lorak homeworld. Mason looked him dead in the eye. Good. He pressed the button. The lab crumpled inwards with a soundless flash. Fire raced through the corridors. Explosions followed like aftershocks in a dying star. As they escaped, Mason watched from the bridge, hands gripping the rail, knuckles white. They played God, he whispered. Now let's bury the gods, too. Word spread faster now. By the end of that cycle, over 30 Lorak subjugation centers had fallen. Small empires began to distance themselves publicly. Trade agreements were canceled. The Lorak Council began to fracture from within. Paranoia turned inward. They started executing their own commanders, purging data, disbanding hunter academies that had existed for generations. And still, the humans came. Not in fleets, but in waves of small, angry, desperate groups. Those who'd heard the stories, who'd lost family, who bore scars, and who wanted blood. Mason welcomed them all. He didn't train them like an army. He turned them into weapons. A year after the fall of the Genesis Spire, the galaxy did something it had never done before. It tried to apologize. A delegation of neutral systems sent a message to the broken suns, asking for peace, offering reparations, trade, unity. Lucas read the message aloud while Mason sat at the edge of a canyon on Kethar 7, watching the twin suns set over burned ruins. And we believe humanity's suffering must be acknowledged, Lucas read. Let us move forward, together. Mason didn't turn. Delete it. They're scared. Good. You could have more than revenge, Mason. You could have power. I don't want power, he said. I want memory. Lucas frowned. Memory? Mason finally looked up. His eyes burned like embers. They made us forget who we are, made us think we were cattle, worms, entertainment. I want every species to remember what happened when they did that. I want history to carry our scream. Lucas sighed. You know they'll never stop, right? Even if we crush the Lorak, someone else will take their place. Mason stood, stretching the stiffness from his joints. Then we stay ready. He turned and walked off into the shadows. That night, Reuben found him alone, staring at the stars. You ever going back? Reuben asked. Mason didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, Back to what? Earth. Mason exhaled, slow and deep. That place was soft, innocent, still believed in heroes and saviors. I can't bring this thing back there. Reuben chuckled darkly. So what? You just keep fighting until there's no one left to kill? Mason looked up. No, he said. I fight until there's no one left who dares. They never thought he'd make it this far. The Lorak believed in bloodlines. They believed in legacy, control, power passed through ritual and dominance. What they didn't believe in, what they never accounted for, was a man with nothing. No home, no family, no politics, no pride, just rage and purpose. Mason Keller didn't just become a name. He became consequence. The Lorak homeworld was called Vorakt, a planet of floating citadels, gravity-sculpted landscapes, and temples built from the bones of their enemies. For centuries, it had stood untouchable. No rebellion had ever breached its orbit. Until now. They saw him coming. One lone ship, torn, blackened, patchworked from half a dozen fallen wrecks. It shouldn't have flown. Its engines coughed radiation. Its outer hull bore human symbols scorched into its metal like scars. From the moment it entered their system, it broadcasted a single word on every channel. Judgment. They scrambled to respond. Defenses powered up. Generals barked orders. Council members ordered fleets to intercept. But it was already too late, because Mason wasn't coming with an army. He was coming with a graveyard. Behind his ship trailed 22 others, each one a drifting tomb, each one carrying warheads stitched together from Lorak technology, designed to ignite fusion storms strong enough to breach atmosphere and pierce shield domes. They weren't missiles. They were sacrifices, piloted by broken sons who had volunteered, knowing exactly what this was. Mason didn't need an army on the ground. He needed to make them feel small. The sky over Vorakt turned black as the ships broke formation. One by one, they plunged from orbit. The Lorak scrambled fighters, interceptors, plasma nets. But the suns didn't dodge. They didn't run. They rammed. Impact after impact shook the capital citadel. Towers cracked. Shields overloaded. Cities evaporated in fire. The air filled with screams, not human ones. Mason's ship came down last. He didn't target a city. He targeted the Hall of Thrones, the sacred seat of the Lorak High Council, the heart of the machine. He crash-landed through the roof. Smoke, fire, debris raining down like steel rain. Mason rose from the wreckage like a revenant. His armor was scorched to the bone, one eye swollen shut, his left hand barely functioning. But his blade was still in his grip, waiting. Inside the throne hall, 12 Lorak stood. Council elders, the architects of pain, the ones who had signed off on turning his species into playthings. They tried to speak, to offer terms. One even begged. Mason didn't listen. He stepped over the rubble and killed every one of them, not with speed, but with intention. Each slash of his blade echoed through centuries of arrogance. When the last body fell, Mason collapsed to his knees. Blood pooled beneath him, alien and human. Above, the citadel burned. Below, across the planet, the humans in slave camps began to rise, to riot, to kill their captors with their bare hands. Fire spread like memory. From orbit, Lucas watched through a hacked satellite feed. He didn't cheer. He didn't speak. He simply whispered, "He did it." They never found Mason's body. Some say the rubble swallowed him. Others say he walked into the throne's fire pit and vanished. A few believe he's still out there, just another ghost among the stars, watching. But it didn't matter. because what he left behind was enough. 10 years later, the Lorak Empire no longer exists. Its name is erased from galactic maps. The species itself fractured into scattered tribes, hiding in the shadows of a galaxy that once feared them. No system will offer them shelter. No government will protect them. Because they remember. They remember what happens when you mistake humanity for sport. A monument stands on the ruins of Vorakt's throne hall. It's not large, not flashy, just a single steel spike driven into the ground, with a sentence etched into it. You thought we were the prey. We remembered we are the storm. Underneath that, a smaller inscription in rough hand, M. Keller. Earth never saw Mason return. But they heard. They watched as ex-captives returned home in battered ships, covered in burns and scars, speaking of a man who taught them to kill gods. Governments struggled to understand it. Media called him a monster, a savior, a ghost, a terrorist, a hero. But survivors didn't debate. They knew he was the reason they were breathing. And so they passed down the stories. To children, to soldiers, to every soul who ever felt small. They told them of the burned man who stood alone in the fire and made the galaxy burn with him.